All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Moving Forward Together, Best Practices for Maintaining Relationships and New Booking Dates. My name is Caitlin Zachary, and I'm the Manager for Programs and Resources at the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. Before we get started, let's review a few technical items to ensure that everyone is properly set up to participate. Closed captioning for this webinar is available by clicking on the closed captioning button at the bottom of the Zoom window as indicated. In addition to the Zoom platform, we are also broadcasting today's webinar on Facebook Live. During today's webinar, Zoom participants will have the opportunity to ask questions and provide comments using the Q&A and chat functions. Unfortunately, we will not be taking questions or comments via Facebook Live. Today, our panelists will be responding to pre-selected questions as well as questions from the audience. Audience questions will be answered at the end of the webinar, but feel free to use the Q&A and chat box throughout the webinar. We'll also be recording this webinar to post on our website within the next few days. To use the Q&A function to ask a question, click the Q&A button in the Zoom window and type your question. If you have comments or questions you'd like to send to us privately, you can utilize the chat box. Make sure you select APAP in the Send To drop-down menu. So now let's kick things off. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Alliance of Performing Arts Conferences. This group consists of representatives from the nation's regional performing arts conferences. The organization meets annually to discuss trends in the field and identify common areas of improvement. Since early March, APAC has been working closely together to provide up-to-date content related to the COVID-19 crisis and ideas for solutions for our various constituencies. APAC members include Arts Midwest, Arts Northwest, the Association of Performing Arts Professionals, International Performing Arts for Youth, Western Arts Alliance, Folk Alliance, South Arts, North Carolina Arts Market, Arts Ready, and NAPAMA. It is my pleasure to introduce the host and moderator for today's webinar, Gail Boyd. Gail has over 30 years of experience in artist management and is the founding president of Gail Boyd Artist Management. She has shaped the careers of countless artists and also has a background in entertainment law. She has been an influential leader in the jazz music industry. Gail is the new president of NAPAMA, and we are so delighted to have her here today to lead this important conversation. Gail, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce all of today's panelists.
Thank you, Caitlin. I am so honored to be here, and it's no exaggeration to say that I could spend 75 minutes with each one of our panelists alone, much less in a group setting. We have today Mr. Steve Lurie, who is president of Music Without Borders. We have Gwethelyn Bronner, executive director of the James Lumber Center for the Performing Arts. We have Tim Jackson, who is the Monterey Jazz Festival's artistic director and also the executive director of Khumba Jazz in Santa Cruz. We have David Briggs, who is the theater director of the High Point Theater. And last but not least, we have Ellen Kodadak, who is the executive and artistic director of Flushing Town Hall. We will have later on asking some questions. We have two agents, and one of them is Jeff Laramie, who is president of SRO Artists Incorporated, and Hina Patel, who is a cultural strategist and CEO and founder of Mela Arts Connect. So I hope that we will have an exciting exchange after the questions and answers. I do want an opportunity for each of you to talk as much as you can in the short time that we have about your organizations. But let me just start by asking, and I'll start with Steve. I'd like to know the size and scope of your organization and how your organization is faring at this time. Steve is, in addition to what I just mentioned, he is hailed as an impresario. He presents and produces concerts on behalf of venues and organizations across the country, whether it's programming a full season or producing large-scale charity events. Music Without Borders works on behalf of venues as their programming department. So Steve, give us an idea of how you are faring during this time with all that you have to do.
Thanks, Gail, and hi, everybody. I hope you and all of your loved ones and friends are doing well during this difficult time.
Thank you.
So we have about 17 or 18 venues across the country, and I'd say the capacity is anywhere from about 250 up to about 2,500. And so we are, although our venues range from the Northeast to Hawaii, we're all kind of going about this at the same way. When we first started, moving shows, it was back in March, and we weren't sure how long this was going to continue. So we moved a lot of the shows in March and in April to June and July. And then we've got further along, and now we've moved those shows to the fall. Some of the shows that have been moved to the fall, some agents are coming and, to us being proactive and saying that, especially with an older artist or a legacy artist, and are saying, you know what, they're not feeling very comfortable about playing in the fall time period. They're uncomfortable getting on a plane, being on a tour bus, and so forth. They're also concerned about their audience's health and well-being. So a lot of the artists that we had for the fall or that have been rescheduled to the fall are now looking and moving into either spring or summer of 21. And that's pretty universal for all of our venues. So for the most part, we've now rescheduled all of our shows through July, and now we are starting on August. A number of our venues, probably the highest density of venues, is in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, which obviously has been one of the hardest hit areas in the country. And so, those are going to come online last. I know that in those three areas, phase 4 is when the entertainment will be coming back. And so, we don't know exactly when, but perhaps sometime, in the fall. We're assuming that we're going to have reduced capacities or social distancing, which are very different. And so we're making preparations, looking at offers, talking to agents, getting a feeling upon, what artists can work with, what agents can work with, what we can work with. So we're still also looking for artists that in late fall can possibly, make a date in our venues too. So we've not completely closed off booking, but we realize that if we do book a date and it doesn't happen, we're going to have to reschedule it. But we're okay with that. So that's generally where all of our venues are. We're kind of all at the same place.
Thank you, Steve, for that. Well, I'm sure we're going to get into almost everything you mentioned a little bit later with the questions. Gwethelyn, I'd like to have you talk to us first. Now, Gwethelyn, I mentioned, is the executive director of James Lumber Center for the Performing Arts. And she has led development and management of the 3 venue facility since 1996. The facilities are used by students, the faculty, local businesses, community organizations, and residents of the surrounding Lake County area. So, Gwethelyn, tell me, how are you faring with the 3 venues that you have to do?
We're not doing anything right now. The college is officially working off-site. That is faculty who are teaching classes, and classes are still going on. Graduation was scheduled for this coming Saturday, I think. Our performances have been canceled beginning mid-March. And of the 3 professional events that I was presenting for the community, all 3 ended up being canceled, 1 by the college and 2 by the artists themselves, right before we were going to cancel. Social distancing is a major issue with all educational institutions in the state of Illinois. And we are following daily updates by the governor of Illinois. when mandates were set for occupancy and for social gatherings, it really kicked us out of the water. Whether we wanted to do things or not, we could not assemble for more than 10 people. So we went right to trying to rethink what might happen when we do come back online or when we do come back alive, live, face to face. We are exploring different seating regulations right now. Our primary theater, in the spacing in our seats, we can have 3 spaces between every seat, 3 seats between every seat. So our 250 seat studio theater drops to about 70 people. Our main stage that normally seats 575 drops to about 200. That's all tentative, nothing is set in stone. We are a community college. That means we are part of the state of Illinois. We are required to follow state of Illinois regulations in terms of everything, how we process bills, how we communicate with people in terms of academic classes, what kinds of classes we have. Everything is regulated by state guidelines, if you will. So my concerns are more, when will we be able to present to any number of people more than 50? Right now, the state of Illinois projects a next phase, a phase 4. We're approaching phase 3 now, phase 4, where we can start having people assemble a 50 or more. That's not 70, that's not 200. That's less than 50. So that's interesting. I have some things promised in terms of events for next season, but I have not contracted them yet. Waiting for, again, college and state guidelines to move forward. But it's making us change the shape and the type of things that we do. And I'm in that process now.
Absolutely. Did you mention that Illinois is at phase 3 now?
Yes, we are in what the governor recently defined in his 5-step process. We are approaching phase 3, which really does allow us to have, again, maximum of 10 people who assembly, but some smaller businesses are reopening for business.
Okay.
The college is planning to try small face-to-face classes as a test this summer. But right now, all teaching is online via Zoom or online courses.
Thank you, Gwendolyn.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite jazz festivals to attend in the world is actually the Monterey Jazz Festival. Tim Jackson has been the artistic director of that festival, as I said, since 1992. And one of my favorite smaller venues is Khumba Jazz, which he also runs. So Tim, tell me, I know that you have 2 different places to look. You have to look at the festival and at a smaller venue. How are you faring?
First of all, hi, Gail. It's nice to see you. Yeah, I have an interesting situation because Monterey Jazz Festival is a large event, about 30 to 35,000 people that we hold every year in September. This year would be September 25 to 27. It's the world's longest running festival at 63 years, so there's a long tradition there. At the moment, we are still on sale. We are not doing any marketing or anything like that, but we're actually having a board meeting tonight, and we will be making a decision as to whether to carry forward with the festival or not. I think we would probably all imagine that a large public gathering in late September is probably not realistic, and I would agree with that assessment. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have to end up postponing the festival to next year. So that is our current status with Monterey, where we are currently in a holding pattern, but those decisions will be made in the next day or so. For Khumba Jazz, which is in Santa Cruz across the bay from Monterey, we have a 200-seat venue that operates year-round, about 25 shows out of every 30 days in the month on average. We had our last show on March 10th with Melissa Aldana, and we are currently closed officially through the end of June although I would imagine that could carry on a little bit longer into July and August. What we are doing right now is looking for ways, once our shelter in place is lifted in California, that we will be able to do some live streaming of small ensembles on our stage with no audience. And then looking towards mid to late summer, depending on what our social distancing requirements are, restructure our room, which we're working on now, to a lower capacity to try and still present some live music this summer, probably starting out with local and regional artists. So that's our status right now.
Thank you, Tim. All the best on that. David Briggs is a board member of NAPAMA, served for 2 years in the executive committee of that organization. He previously served on the board of the North Carolina Presenters and has been presenting and in venue management for over 35 years. He's currently the theater director of the High Point Theater. And David, tell us, how are you faring during this time?
Well, thank you, Gail. It's an honor to be a part of this panel. We are a municipal venue, and so since about the 17th of March, we are non-essential employees, so the staff was required to work remotely. But we still came into the building because we have systems that have to operate. We have to make sure the HVAC still functions, the lights turn on, that the sound system isn't compromised, and that all of our technical needs and requirements are doing okay. To that end, the fourth quarter of our year is when we bring in about 40% of our annual revenue. So we have canceled everything through June and through the first 3 weeks of July. I've got a couple of rentals that are very hopeful that will actually have capacity to be able to do dance competitions and Miss North Carolina scholarship pageant and that sort of thing. I'm not sure that any of those activities are going to actually happen, and trying to encourage them to find ways to monetize their events through a virtual means, especially for the rentals. We usually book around 25 to 30 events a year that we pay for. Ended up moving 5 of those events out of the current season into 4 of them into the next season, and 1 actually it's what a Heenis show into the 21-22 season, assuming of course that folks will be able to travel internationally. So that's certainly been a concern. But my staff is doing well. We actually met together for the first time face to face yesterday, and we're ready to rock and roll. If there's a silver lining to having downtime, is all of the time that we've gotten now is that we usually are terribly busy during late July and early August. Now we're packed. So we've taken all of these projects and we put them into May, June, and July. So we're getting new carpet. We're getting some new audio equipment and some installations with that. So we're trying to use our time as wisely as we can, and that also allows me to keep my folks employed. One of the things that we find very painful, or I find personally very painful, is we pay an awful lot of gig employees to come in with our shows. They run our sound, they run our lights, our follow spots, their stage crew, and so on. And none of those folks have income coming in. That hurts a great deal. And our backline folks. I mean, we don't keep a lot of backline in stock. And so the people that we have been working with to bring the drum kits in and the amps and so on, they're not receiving any revenue either. And that's painful. And I don't see any of those folks being helped financially terribly much, except for maybe the $1,200 they got as a stimulus bonus. But we're a 900-seat venue. I didn't mention that. We're very concerned about capacity because even if we get to 50% capacity, you still have to separate enough seats that you're really looking at about 30 to 35% capacity.
Dave, thank you for that. You raised something that I want to bring up a little bit later as well. I'd like to hear Helen Kodadek Helen, as I mentioned, is the executive and artistic director of Flushing Town Hall. She has more than 30 years experience in nonprofit arts administration and now serves as the executive director there. During her tenure, she has significantly expanded cultural and arts programming, burnishing the institution's reputation as a destination providing global arts for a global audience. So, Ellen, you're in New York City and you are sort of in the belly of everything that was going on because you're in Queens, as I understand it. Tell me how you and your organization are faring.
Yes, thank you, Gail, and thank you all for having me on this panel. I hope everyone's keeping well. Yeah, Flushing Town Hall is located in Queens in New York City. We are in a predominantly Asian neighborhood. And actually our first cancellation was February 1st. So we started to see the effects of the virus very, very early on. Queens is the most culturally diverse county in America. There's over 138 languages spoken in Queens. And Flushing Town Hall is a historic landmark that's 159 years old and is on the National Register of Historic Places and is owned by the city of New York. And we manage it, we restored it, and we program it on behalf of the city. So typically our programming is very robust, and as some of my colleagues, spring is our busiest time of the year. And we had a jam-packed season of 70 programs between January to June. And we're supposed to be extremely busy with rentals and graduations and weddings. And so for us, springtime is the time of the year that we're bringing in almost 40% of our income. So we are now flat. As I mentioned, our first cancellation was February. Then we tried to continue some programming in February and just saw our numbers plummeting. March, everything was canceled. And initially we were canceling 1 month at a time because we were trying to get a sense of what was happening. And then it became readily apparent that everything was going to be closed until at least the end of June. Right now, we are quite unsure, actually. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty, given that we're in New York City. Queens is the epicenter of the virus in the city, and all I hear outside my window all day long are ambulances and helicopters. So those of you who are familiar with New York City know that there's a huge amount of street noise, and that has completely stopped. So it's obviously extremely disconcerting. Our staff has been working remotely, and that also has been really fascinating. We had to buy laptops for some of our staff. Not everyone had internet at home. Many of our audiences do not have internet at home and are English language learners. So that's also something that we're trying to think of, how can we best support our audiences. I know I mentioned the word uncertainty. We don't know when we're going to be able to physically reopen. The governor of the state has just over the weekend expanded the pause order until the end of June. There's conversation that that might last even longer. Arts and entertainment, as one of my colleagues on the call mentioned, is in stage 4, with New York City being in a stage in and of itself that no one quite knows what that's going to look like. So on the staff level, we're beginning to have conversations about what does reopening look like? What does recovery look like? We're concerned, obviously, because our numbers are relatively small. Our gallery seats 125 people, our garden about 200 people, and our theater 308. What's nice about our theater is we can pull out the seats and the risers and bring it down to about 270 for schools and families. But if you look at the numbers of seat reduction, it's almost impossible to make the financials work. Not to mention, where we're located, most of our audiences and our staff commute by public transportation. Very few people are traveling by car. And so just the questions around safety protocols, not only for our audiences, but how do we make sure that we can keep our staff safe, our elderly volunteers safe, our artists safe, backstage, crew, etc. It's all something that we're trying to evaluate while also looking at the financial repercussions and where is that money coming from.
I wish you all the best. You know,
Thank you.
thank you for that, Ellen. David mentioned something that I think is the perfect segue to introduce our agents on the panel. And that is that almost everybody who comes to work at these venues are gig employees. And their income went from whatever it was to zero in a very short period of time. So we've asked two agents to develop some questions to ask you guys. And I'd like now to introduce Jeff Laramie to you. Jeff Laramie is the president, as I said earlier, of SRO Artists, and he did serve 2 terms on the NAPAMA board, chairing the Professional Development Committee. And we also have Hina Patel, who is a cultural strategist, producer, consultant, agent, manager, blah, 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 on and on. But she's the founder and CEO of Mela Arts Connect, and she's also on the board of NAPAMA. So I'm going to turn it over to them. I do want to introduce one other person, who's Ron DeStefano, who will be looking at the questions that you might pose in the question and answer section of this. And if we have time later on, after Hina and Jeff are finished, then Ron will come in and ask some of those questions of you as well. So Jeff, I'd like to start with you, and you can take it away now and start with your questions, and then Hina will follow.
Thank you, Gail. Thanks, APAP and NAPAMA for this panel today. Thanks for putting this together. Interesting to hear from all the institutions that are closed or delayed, and perhaps your income has been interrupted. But like Gail said, for artists, for agents, for managers, for support teams, their income and our income has simply stopped. And so we face some pretty immediate challenges. Here at SRO, we're basically still employed. We got a PPP grant, which will get us through the end of June. And that's why this time is so critical for our team, because we want to be efficient in facilitating necessary schedule changes for work for our artists for the future. And like Steve said, we've seemed to be spending a couple of months doing a year's worth of work, moving all the shows and trying to reach presenters to engage in what we're going to do for the future. And this is why we're counting on our presenter partners to discuss the future as soon as possible, to move existing programs and consider new programmings for next season. And this leads me to my first question, and I'm going to direct this, probably start with David, because you're a municipal organization and you run on a budget. So do you know already that you will be dealing with budget cuts that will impact what you can book going forward? And if so, will that impact your choices of artists that you book?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, one of the things that we didn't realize when I started rescheduling all the shows from this year into next budget year, so I really hadn't taken into account that was going to impact the money that I had already set aside, or for the contracts that we'd already scheduled for the 2021 season. I have since gone back to my boss, the city manager, and said, look, we're doing this. We're not going to lose. We're not going to give up the deposits that we put down for these artists. We're going to put them into next season. So there might be some departments that do take a bigger hit than we do, but you can't cut my programming budget and my marketing budget and my staffing budget for those shows, because we've already expended the advertising on those shows from this past fiscal year. Our annual budget does not carry over from one season to the next. In fact, for every ticket that I sell before June 30th, it goes into this current fiscal year. So it's kind of a strange phenomenon. I've worked on the other where it always carries over. This is not one of those situations. So it's, for now, I'm finished booking for the 2021 or the 2021 season. I had intended to pick up a couple of more shows, but that's just not going to happen, at least not for the time being, until things flesh out. And if we end up getting pushed back into October, it's going to take about 7 shows that we've already got scheduled in the September, October window, and end up pushing them either into spring of 21 or more likely the fall of 2021 or even spring of 22. So it's certainly, I am still thinking ahead because like most presenters, we see an artist showcase and we think, gosh, we'd really like to bring them to our community. So I've got a list that's probably 5 pages long of artists I want to present. And it's going to stay that way. And I kind of roll through that to see where the time frames fit and so on. So it's been a little bit of a challenge because it's basically pushed my list, my wants list out a couple of years. And so that's kind of where we're standing right now. But budgetarily, the biggest thing that's hurting the city is we rely on sales tax and property taxes. The city doesn't rely on the income that the theater brings in to operate the city. They rely on the people who are, selling electricity and picking up the garbage and the property taxes to do all that. So
Sure.
We're sort of an auxiliary service. So far, they haven't come to us and said, we don't need a theater anymore. And but that could well be put on the plate if this extends for an extended period of time. And I think a lot of presenters are in that situation. And if I may, just momentarily, I'm also on a call with the North Carolina presenters for municipal venues throughout the state. Some of my municipal colleagues aren't booking shows until February of 21. Some of them are not booking any shows at all during 21, up until summer of 21. That's quite a change.
Wow. Does anybody else want to comment on that? Gwethlyn, I know you work on a budget as well, being at a university. Are budget cuts going to impact what you can book or who you book?
Ooh, everybody, please keep your fingers crossed. Right now, no. But I am very cognizant of the fact that our budget for the next fiscal year is going to the board meeting the last Tuesday of May. Anything can happen between now and then. And I don't anticipate a budget cut. But much like Dave was saying, I do have acts that I plan to reschedule. Deposit may have been paid already. So that means I need to find or pony up with the balance of the shows to fit in addition to the events I had already planned to hold, none of which are going to be able to be accommodated in the same way with our backstage area as well as our front of house audience. I can no longer think about doing a big show anymore because I don't have numerous dressing rooms to provide the social distancing backstage that may be required. That's huge for me. No one else in my college really thought about it that way. So that means our academic performances of music, theater, and dance, those public performances, are also subject to that. Once it's on their radar, and oh yeah, I put it on their radar, by the way, it's causing discussion and thought that really hadn't happened before. Will that impact me? Maybe. Will that impact the budget? Maybe.
Yeah. Are you thinking about, like, maybe Steve's hiring more smaller groups in terms of scope of duos, trios? Do you have that same problem backstage, the social distancing?
Oh, yes, I do. And my theme, as I just met with my staff a couple of weeks ago, we're talking now, my theme is small shows. I know that now, without question. Now, whether we'll be able to do those small shows for more than 50 people, that's still up in the air. I don't know that right now. Right now, we can only assemble up to 10 people. 10 people or more, we're going to be shut down.
Well, if you charge them each $1,000, you'll come out just fine. I don't know if we want to stay on this question. Steve, I was going to ask you to follow up on that as well.
Sure. One of the things that we're facing is with a lot of our venues, we use the income derived from ticket sales from more popular programming. We use that income to help pay for whether it's world music, whether it's more mission-based types of programming. And, now I'm under the belief that there's no such thing as a sure thing anymore, because we just don't know, what I call the fear factor of once shows start coming back online, what percentage of the audience is going to come back without a vaccine, and how fast they'll return after there's a vaccine. And so you look at poll after poll, and the majority of people that answering these polls are saying that they're not going to come back until there's a vaccine. And then when you look at performing arts centers specifically, I think that it's even a higher percentage, because obviously we generally cater to an older demographic. So, I think that clubs will be able to act with this in an easier way. But I see less income coming in from things we used to consider sure bets, that we used to help underwrite the things that we really wanted to present as art or culturally important.
Thanks. Hina, you want to move on to the next question?
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here and sharing where you are. It's really clear just from even the sampling of 5 arts organizations here, well, actually more, we have 9 or 10 or more, depending on, Steve, what's the latest count for you in terms of organizations represented here. And you can see quite a range in terms of how you guys are thinking about booking conversations, right? Postponement versus new artists. So that actually brings up the next question. I think one of the biggest challenges that agents, managers are facing right now is, when do you reach out to a presenter about future bookings? So we're not talking about rescheduled bookings. We're not talking about cancellations, right? But brand new conversations for artists, getting dates for an artist that you do not already have on the books. When do we start reaching out? So I'm very curious if in a sentence or two, if you can each share when you would want someone to reach out. And a follow-up to that would be that the answer seems to be changing all the time. So how are you letting people know? Because we're sitting here confused. So Tim, why don't you start with that?
Okay, thank you, Hina. Right now, I'm not looking at doing, well, I'll be talking with my Khumba hat on here, because the festival is kind of one big entity that's either going to happen or not happen. For Khumba, I've got a pretty full schedule for the rest of the year, so I'm not looking at any new artist program for 2020. I feel like I'll be lucky if we can just get through this year with a few shows with a modified seating capacity. So I'm not when agents or managers call me, I'm just letting them know that I need a little bit more time, but that it has to be looking towards Q1 and Q2 of 2021, and that is kind of my time frame. As far as the deals, that we're making, I think it's too early to really. If I was to settle on a date with an artist, I think I would have to leave the negotiation part of it an open question for the moment, until we know what our capacity is going to look like and what the appetite is for our audience to come back to our venue.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Steve?
We're happy to speak to people today. We've been spending the last few months rescheduling shows and hundreds of them, and we'll be rescheduling more shows as time goes by. But at the same time, we were still in the process of booking the fall, and everything just shut down, and we went to strictly to rescheduling. And so, if there is something that's that's really interesting for probably late fall, we'll take a look at it. We have to be more judicious in what we're considering now, certainly, and planning on, reduced capacities from the get-go. But we'll talk now about 2021. We want to maintain as best we can a business as usual philosophy from the presenting side. All of our venues are furloughed. Nobody's working there. So, we're not announcing shows. We're just announcing rescheduled dates. But we want to keep the wheels moving on presenting. If something has to be moved again because we don't have dates in November, then we'll deal with it at that time. But we're talking to agents every day now.
Does anyone have a different approach that they're taking from what Tim or Steve has suggested here?
I really would, as Dave, I really would prefer that folks not really talk to me about 21, 22 until September, which is about the usual time when the conferences take place. Because at that point, I'm still working on getting the current season up and running, and I'm really not thinking that far down the road. And with the situation being as fluid as it is right now, we may be moving things from September, October, November into fall or spring of 21, 22.
Well, can I offer a suggestion to our panelists as well as the presenters and venues that are joining us on this webinar? As you heard just from these 3 different responses, there's very different approaches as to when someone wants to be contacted. As agents, managers, producers, we're trying to maintain all of these relationships and keep track of them all, which you can imagine is a lot. A simple suggestion that I think would make a lot of lives easier for us if you would take the time to do it is perhaps having a quick template response ready that's something along the lines of saying, look, I am not yet in a position to discuss future possibilities. I'm not exactly sure when, but if you can circle back to me at the end of July or at the end of September, etc. Just a simple response, I think, would make it so much easier for us to just know, because we literally are playing this game right now and doing mental jump rope of should I call this person? Should I not? Is it insensitive, or am I going to lose possibilities for my artist? So something like that could be really, really helpful for your comrades in this field. So that's my little side suggestion. Gweth, I think you have your hand up as a response to that suggestion. Go right ahead.
Thank you, and I feel you. I understand. I want to say I over-understand. And if I had an independent company, if I had an independent organization, it would be easy to program my emails to bounce and say, sort of like an out of office message, I'm not taking any calls or invitations or discussing new shows at this time. Call me in another 3 months. But the reality is I am in the construct of a college, a community college, a state-oriented community college, by the way. So I get a plethora of emails on several levels, never mind calls. And with our work at home, we call it remote work, but it's really working from home. Even though the college is still open, we're working from home. The idea that I can receive calls and talk is less possible right now. And I understand the desire to need to know something now, but I don't have anything to tell you right now. I can't tell you when I will have something to tell you. That's the frustrating thing on my end, on our end. If I could read into the future, I'd be playing lotto and I'd own my own private island right now.
Appreciate that, Gweth. But it's an idea that some people might be able to implement. I know, yes. Ellen, you actually said earlier that you were going month by month and now are looking at longer chunks. I am curious to hear from you on how you're approaching rebooking conversations. Oh, sorry, new booking conversations, if you are entertaining them at all.
Sure. So our first priority is going to be to try to rebook everyone that we had to postpone or cancel. Now, in some cases, because we present a lot of artists coming in from overseas or from other states, I don't know what the feasibility or the timeline of that is going to be, but that's really our commitment, to try to rebook those artists first. That being said, there are some funding opportunities that we're hoping will switch the nature of their funding. While some foundations are exploring, are they going to insist that all artists have to be performing live, or are they going to be willing to switch to artists performing in some kind of online content? So for me, the more I know about who is available, who might be either routing through New York or who might be willing and available to do some sort of online content, I'm always happy to know about those things. I think if an agent or a manager doesn't mind getting getting an email from me at 3 o'clock in the morning, which is when I seem to be up every night trying to figure things out, that would be fine. No promises, no guarantees. I have no clue what our budget is going to look like come fiscal 21 or fiscal 22. Given that we're in New York City, we've all been led to believe that we're going to have our budget slashed. So in terms of what kind of programming we'll be able to afford to do, that's also a really uncertain question.
Great, thank you so much, Ellen.
Sure.
One more thing that actually came in from the comments as just a simple potential option is to add some information into your signature for the presenting organizations, that people can just get that. So just some ideas out there, but the consensus seems to be open to having those conversations, but proceed with empathy and awareness, I think, is the message that I'm hearing from all of you. So I do appreciate you sharing your varied perspectives.
Great, thanks, Hina. I'm going to jump ahead to a new question, and this is about, we've been hearing a lot about how theaters are going to be set up, whether a 500 cap initially when they open, maybe shortened down to 200 cap, or 1,000 capacity down to 300. So there's been a lot of talk in the industry about how venues are going to approach this in terms of their deal structures. So how I'm going to frame the question is, with limited seating and added expenses, will you be looking at ideas like doing 2 shows in a day, or doing it over 2 days, or where you can sell your full capacity tickets over more events? Steve, start with you, and Tim, I think both have venues that are going to be probably restructured. Maybe everybody does, but I'll start with you, Steve. How does that look for you?
So for the most part, we're open to looking at any type of deal that makes sense for both the artist and the venue. And we've been going through this now for a couple of months, and it's been a very collaborative process working with agents and managers. And I really do feel that there's this sense that we're in this together, that there's a partnership, and I've never felt that as much as I feel now. And so I'm hoping that once things pick up, that sense of partnership will remain. But we're looking at for the right artist, if it's on a like a potentially a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, we could look at doing 2 shows in an evening. We've got to think about the timing of the shows, which would be different now because we'll have to do cleaning and sanitizing in between those shows, which we normally wouldn't do. So there's, we have to explore things like that. There could be, again, 2 shows in 2 nights, but those are going to be added expenses, especially if there's, renting sound equipment and backline and things like that. So these are all things that we'll look at, and we're going to try to, we want as best we can to have the shows happen and there to be as much minimized risk as possible for everyone. So I think that hopefully a lot of this will happen when it's time, and we'll be able to figure these kinds of things out.
Great. Tim, also to you, now Khumba, it isn't a very big venue to begin with. And I think you do multiple shows, but how about at the festival? How are there ways that you're going to try to deal with this lowered audience size?
Well, I'll deal or address Khumba first. But first of all, I'd like to agree with Steve that I do feel that there is a strong camaraderie within the industry right now. And I've had really good conversations with artists and managers, and there's a feeling that we all are working together and trying to find mutually agreeable ways to proceed. So that part feels very good to me. For Khumba, with a 200-seat venue, we are already looking at ways that we can keep our social distancing. We've got a couple of different models where we set up in small pods of 2 and 4 groups of seats where we can still get close to 60 seats out of a 200-seat venue with the social distancing requirements. We can also probably do, with the size of our stage, up to a 3 or 4 piece group. So I think we will just renegotiate with the artists, and that's why I think we'll start first with local and regional artists who can probably drive to the venue. We'll renegotiate to a mutual agreement. Do 2 shows in a night, probably a show at 6 o'clock and a show at 8 o'clock. We do have a kitchen, so we can still provide our dinner service. And I think that at least will be a way to get dip our toe back into the marketplace and get back to what we do best. In regards to the festival, that's a much trickier animal to address. I don't know how we could really, in that large festival setting with thousands of people, really adhere to the social distancing, and that's where I think we're going to have to make some hard decisions this week as to if we can really safely, most importantly, and secondly, successfully continue forward. And I'm not sure, frankly, what that would look like if we did try and move forward, but it would present some extreme logistical challenges for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Jeff, can I add on to something if I may?
Please.
One of the, we're thinking about a lot in terms of what are things going to look like once we're able to present concerts again. And I look at it as like an onion where, you peel back one piece and there's like all these other things that you didn't think about, all these different layers. And so we're talking about potentially doing 2 concerts in a night. We also have to think about, if we are mandated to be taking temperatures and handing out masks, what time we'll open the doors, that could be totally different. So the timing of concerts could be different. Also, especially at performing arts centers, during intermission, with social, while keeping socially distanced, those lines for the bathrooms, we may have to look at extending the intermission for
Sure.
quite some time in order to make sure to keep people safe. We also are assuming that, with performing arts centers, very often the volunteers are senior citizens and they may not want to come back. And I think also many of the performing arts centers may take it on themselves to say, it may not be as safe for you to come back. And so we'll be looking at hiring security to deal with temperatures, to deal with handing out face masks, handing out programs. And other things we're thinking about is, having more security so to make sure that people stay socially distanced, whether it's a cut capacity or whether it's actual social distancing. And also, there are times where you have artists where the audience wants to get on their feet and they want to dance in the aisles and they want to dance in front of the band. And very often the bands encourage that. Well, we can't have that now probably for a while. So how are we going to react to that? To make sure that the audience and the artists are all on the same page. So there's a lot to think about.
I saw a comment come in, and it was something I was thinking about as well. When you mentioned intermissions, if you go to a 2-show format, you might go to a 1-set performance.
Right.
Then there isn't an intermission for people to stand in line. And then you have a not longer time period between shows.
Yep, that certainly could be. Everything is up for possibilities now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I agree. We're certainly looking at that at Flushing Town Hall. Our spaces are small. The building was built to welcome the Northern soldiers back from fighting in the Civil War. So it was not built as a theater. So the entire building has been repurposed for the arts. Our backstage is really small. We have one tiny elevator that services the entire building, and just trying to figure out all of those logistics. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about intermission, but you're absolutely right. Just areas of crowd control. As a small, mid-sized organization, there's no way that we would be able to afford to hire additional security staff.
Mm-hmm.
And we physically wouldn't even have the space for them to function within the building as well. So these are all a lot of considerations. And again, the question of safety for the staff who are working, safety for the tech crew and the backstage people and the artists coming in. How do you make sure that everyone is not only getting to your venue, but also navigating the physical space in a way that's not going to have them be sick? Another concern that I hadn't even thought about that came up on another call yesterday was liability insurance. Say, God forbid, a patron or an employee or an artist comes to your venue and then 2 weeks later, unfortunately, becomes ill. There's a liability question if they then come back and sue you for improper sanitary protocols or other concerns and issues. Part of me hates to bring up this financial concern and something like insurance, but I think it's important for everyone to realize that as presenters and as agents, these are all issues that we have to tackle together as a field and figure out how are we going to make everyone, regardless of who that everyone is, as safe and as comfortable as possible coming to our spaces and then going home from our spaces.
We could probably have a whole session on insurance.
Yes, we could. Let's not, but we could.
Gwethlyn, did you have another comment?
Yes, I wanted to call everyone's attention to the Event Safety Alliance's reopening guide. My tech director brought that to our attention yesterday, and I think it was just recently released. And I did go through several of the 30 pages, and I think it's wonderful. And I think the team that got together to really look at what event professionals need to think about as we try to reopen in this time of coronavirus was excellent work. And I give it many kudos. And this was edited by Stephen A. Adelman. Look that up. Some of the things we are talking about is possibly doing 2 shows in a day, spaced out. We've certainly done that for school shows, doing 2 performances in a day. We don't anticipate being able to do bust-in school shows anymore because the schools are going to take the lead on whether their children are going to be safe riding in a bus. Probably not. So it's going to change what we do and how we do. We have Sundays that are great for matinees for seniors. They fill it out. But we have 7 p.m. shows. So if you balance a 3 and a 7:30, yeah, that might happen. So we think about those things, but the safety element is what we are really going to be challenged by. Yeah, insurance, yeah, that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother webinar. But safety, every time we get to a point where we think we figured something out, and I think one of my colleagues on the panel mentioned that before, we have 3 or 4 other things that pop up as we say, oh, didn't even think about that. Safety is going to be the #1 concern for our college, for our facility. And whatever we have to do to ensure that is what we have to do, and hope that we can work with artists who feel the same way. And it may mean dialing back on some of the things that the artists prefer to have or have available. Conversation is critical.
Which is actually a great segue into something that has been coming up a lot in the Q&As and in the chat, and you guys have been referencing a little bit, is that one, the shows that you have had to cancel or postponed, there's obviously an ongoing dialogue with the agent or the manager going on, right? But what I'm also hearing is opportunities for things that you weren't perhaps thinking about before, like smaller shows, right? Perhaps people with smaller shows wouldn't have considered reaching out to you in the past, but now they know that you're this person to call. There's also the fact that we don't know when we're going to be back in our venues, right? So are you looking at virtual? Now, I don't want to turn this into a conversation around virtual programming, but what I would like to talk about a little bit is the ways that you are keeping your relationships with the agents active outside of the ones that you're directly working with in this moment, and how you're doing outreach or brainstorming around alternative or out of the box programming ideas, be it virtual, be it like, you know, not necessarily shows, but educational programming, or even starting to program on the lawn outside your venue instead of being in your venue. How are you having these conversations? And are those conversations, because of circumstances, being limited to the people that are in your direct networks in that moment because they're top of mind, or are you going beyond that? Several questions in there, but I hope that you got them. Dave, we actually haven't heard from you for a while. I know that you did say that you're not looking at anything until 21-22, but with regards to the things that you're reshuffling around for 2021, if we don't come back to be able to come into live, what are alternatives? How are you thinking about alternative ideas?
Well, I don't ever intend to do virtual concerts, because if I want to look at something on a TV, I can do that every day. I don't mean to be disparaging to those concerts, because some of them are brilliant, but frankly, that's not something I want my audience to have to deal with. I think we're in this for live concerts, and if I'm looking at it on a screen, it's not live, even if they're performing it right then. But the other thing is we have a large outdoor venue space adjacent to the theater, and we are contemplating trying to move some of our shows outside where we can actually socially distance them using marks on the sidewalk. It will require us bringing in a stage, which is an added expense, because obviously I don't have that expense when we're already doing it in our house. But my space is capable of holding socially distanced around 1,000 people. So if you basically sell packages of tickets in a family, let's say a family grouping of 4, I still look at 6 to 10 feet between, and that's all the way around. That's not just side by side. That's 6 feet in front, 6 feet behind, and 6 feet on either side. So we are looking at doing that. Haven't pulled the trigger on any of that yet, because frankly, if we get to July and August, and the governor limits our capacity, I don't even want to venture into that conversation, frankly. But we have looked at that. We probably are not going to be doing school performances next year unless we take a small group and take it to an individual school. And that's probably how that's going to happen. I'm not sure if that answers that question, but.
No, that does. Tim, what about you? I mean, you spoke about looking at live streaming. I know there's been some questions that we've been having that have been coming up in the chats and the Q&A about monetization and fee structures when you're looking at alternative ideas. I know you already said that you don't really have, you haven't fixed on something, but I'm curious where your thoughts are right now around financial models as well as with regards to alternative ideas.
Well, with my Monterey Jazz Festival hat on, we have an artist in residence, at least one every year, that works with us during the festival time and throughout the year with our education programs. This year, it's a brilliant young pianist, Christian Sands. So obviously, he has not been able to come out for our Next Generation Jazz Festival this year, which we had to cancel, which is our student festival. He wasn't able to come out for our summer jazz camp, which we would do next year. However, we have started a new program with him that we've started recording today called Welcome to the Sands Box, which is Christian talking with his contemporaries in a focused thematic discussion that we are going to record 4 of these episodes with different musicians and colleagues of his. And we'll bundle those into a series and release them as series 1. Then we'll start working on series 2. So it is a way to continue to engage our patrons. There's a part of me that agrees with Dave about the live. I'm not sure that we're not doing our job if we're not live streaming concerts. I do think there are other ways that we can engage our audiences. And I think this Welcome to the Sands Box is an idea of doing something like that. And we are making sure, obviously, We are compensating all the artists for their participation in this. We're not asking for, it's not a subscription series, and nobody has to pay for it. People can make a contribution if they like, which we will then, in addition, share that with the artists. So we don't have all the answers yet, but we are looking for ways, most importantly, to get new, fresh, and exciting content out there over and above just trying to live stream a concert, and find a way that the artists and the organization can realize some kind of monetization from this, so we can keep things going for the future.
Great, thank you so much. Ron, I know we've been mindful of time, and I know we've got a lot of Q's and A's. Do you want to lobby one of them at least here for our panelists?
Sure. Ron DeStefano here, Epic Arts Management, on behalf of NAPAMA. Looking at all the questions, there are a lot of themes that are repetitive, and a lot of them are being addressed right now currently. But one thing that hasn't been brought up for the presenters, how do you plan on shopping for next season, assuming that some of the conferences that we're used to going to are either going to go virtual or be canceled? Do you have methodologies in place to communicate with the people that you need to move forward with next season?
Ellen, we haven't heard from you in a while.
Let me unmute myself. Okay, that is a great question, and that makes me really sad because I love the conferences that I go to and love seeing my friends and colleagues and learning about new artists. I think we're going to have to go back to the model of many, many years ago when we were booking artists from an electronic press kit. And, you know, my staff and I don't like to book anyone unless we have seen that person live or that act live. So that makes it obviously far more challenging now. But I think when you work with an agent or a manager that you trust, and that you have a lot of confidence in, that their artists are representing the kind of quality and mission-driven artistry that you're looking for, then you can narrow down the field a little bit. And I think that for a year or so, that's what we're all just going to have to do. We all have artists that have been on our radar for a while now, you know, that giant list that presenters always have of artists that you'd like to bring to your community at some point in time. And I think that we'll be going back to those lists and seeing who's available and what's possible once we know whether or not we can reopen and how we're going to reopen.
Well, in the spirit of us being in this together, as Steve brought up earlier, might I also, I love hearing the fact that you're opening up how you're exploring looking at artists, that, you know, before it was like you had to see it live, and now you're going to relax that rule or around selecting artists. May I also just point out again for all of our presenter colleagues that are joining us today that there are many self-represented artists. There are many people who are newer to the field that do not have established relationships with you wonderful folks. So whatever plan you do decide to take towards programming in the future, please be sure to find ways to keep a level of discovery and openness towards folks that you don't know, and whatever that might look like for you. But I just wanted to share that because I think it is important for us to remember those who are just coming into our field or recently joined the field, and making sure that we're continuing to be welcoming to them and making them part of the future that we're building together.
I just want to jump in and say that there's been no decision yet about any of the regional conferences or APAP being canceled. So I wanted to make sure that we were not operating from the presumption that they have been, because there's been no word of that. So we are now about 6 minutes away from the end. So Jeff and Hina, did you have another question? I think you actually did. And if we could get it in quickly, I'd love to hear one of those questions come in. Thank you.
Well, we were going to ask about family programming. I know a couple people touched on that, but we didn't talk much about international programming. And that was one of our questions, was with visas being put on hold and other related travel issues, will this impact your ability to consider international artists for the future? I think everybody on the panel books international artists. And many people that are watching. How do you feel about that now?
Dave
Ellen,
again.
go ahead,
Um,
David.
Yeah, I don't do a lot of international artists, but the ones that I do, I'm quite concerned that they're not going to get their visas. Thank you, Hina, for this coming year, even into the spring. So I have a group coming in from England and another from Scotland this coming year. And frankly, I'm pretty concerned that we're going to end up pushing those into 21, 22, maybe even to 22, 23.
Mm-hmm. Ellen, I know you do a lot of international programs as well.
Yes, we do, especially in our school and family series. About a third of our programming is international. We're trying to look at spring 2021. I mean, we know that visa paperwork has to happen now. I know that what we all want to avoid if there's a second wave or maybe even a third wave of the pandemic is opening and closing and opening and closing. And so spring 2021 feels far away, but we all know in this business it's not far away. So we'd love to be able to continue booking international artists. I wish I had a more definitive answer. I mean, there's such uncertainty around it, and we certainly don't want to make promises that we then will have to not be able to fulfill later on. I think that's everyone's concern.
I think travel can also be an issue. I noticed a comment in the chat section about air travel, and I think that that's important to bring up. It isn't just the visas. It's is it safe to have these artists traveling for such long distances? It's just it's a very thorny issue right now, and it's tough to really determine any direction that we can go. It is kind of that classic, you just have to wait and see what's going to happen. But I think the travel is as important an issue as the visas themselves.
Mm-hmm. I know we have international tours that are going to start in 21, and we're counting on those. They haven't been canceled. Everybody's working on their visas, and we're just going to move forward on them as best we can. And if, like everybody says, if we run into a stumbling block and have to postpone them, we'll get to that point and we'll postpone. But right now, our tours are on.
Well, when we had to cancel our tour for Bollywood Boulevard this spring, and one of the reasons was one of the presenters was even saying that we would have to quarantine for 2 weeks. Right. We had a 4.5-week tour. How is that going to work? So that's just another consideration. I will offer this as someone who works a lot with international artists, is that international artists, many of them do have internet connections where they are. So looking at alternative ways to present them virtually is something that would be worth considering. I've seen a couple of really successful sort of behind the scenes conversations and showing clips from the show, activities being done by venues that have actually been great at building audiences and building excitement for people to want to see them when they actually can be presented. So just putting that out there as an idea.
I just want to jump in there. As I said when I started this, I literally could spend 75 minutes or more with each one of you who so graciously gave of your time and your energy to do this panel. You've given all of us a lot to think about. And I kind of feel like where we are now, it's like that symbol where the one symbol means crisis and opportunity at the same time. And I think we have to take this crisis and figure out how we do go forward together. It's like somebody has told us that there's a new dance that we have to learn, but nobody gave us the steps. So we have to hold on to each other and figure out how we're going to do this new dance. I want to thank you so much for all of your time and all of your energy in doing this. And I believe that Caitlin is going to come back and just see us out. But let's stay positive. Let's stay as close to our goals as we possibly can. And let's learn this new dance together. Caitlin?
Thank you so much, Gail. A big thanks to you, Gail, and to all of our panelists today, and Hina and Jeff and Ron for fielding our questions. We really appreciate all of your insights. This recording will be available on our APAP website in about a day or so. We'll also be sending out a brief survey about the webinar to our participants, and we'd appreciate your feedback on your experience. That's all. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope that you'll join us again soon.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Very well.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. We'll all do the Zoom wave.